Why have the health risks of moderate wine consumption been grossly overstated? How does moderate wine consumption reduce heart disease? And hint, it's not resveratrol. And how does wine reduce the risk of certain cancers and have no strong link with others, such as breast cancer? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and tips and more. If you're watching this video on the replay, please get in the comments and type the word replay. I would love to know where you're logging in from. What city are you in? What's in your glass? And of course, if you're here with me live on this live stream, please let me know where you are. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online wine and food pairing classes. And you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, including our guest, whom I shall introduce momentarily. I am live streaming this video for the first time on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, but it is based on a recorded conversation I had with our wonderful guest for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. I'll be jumping, though, into the comments live, so get in there. Let me know what tips and stories you're enjoying, what questions haven't we answered, and I will be responding to your questions, as they say, in real time. Before I introduce our guest, just let me say that 3 of you are going to win a copy of his terrific new book called The Very Good News About Wine. It's excellent. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. From 1973 to 1994, Tony Edwards worked as a producer at the BBC on science documentaries in the UK. He has won numerous awards for his work, including 2 from the British Medical Association. From 1995 onward, he moved away from film to work as a science and technology journalist for publications such as The Sunday Times and Reader's Digest. He began to concentrate on medicine, writing for a variety of publications, including the celebrated magazine What Doctors Don't Tell You. In 2013, he published his first book on alcohol called The Very Good News About Booze, catchy, and in 2023, he followed that with The Very Good News About Wine, which we'll be discussing today. And he joins us now from his home in rural Kent, which is about 50 miles south of London. Welcome, Tony. It's so great to have you here with us.
Very good to be with you. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. All right. Before we jump into our discussion, I want to note that neither Tony nor I are doctors, so none of what we discuss should be interpreted as medical advice. This is meant to be for informational purposes only, so please consult your medical professional to determine how much wine, if any, is right for you. All right. Tony, you have a story about tasting wine at 11 in the morning. Maybe share with us what happened.
It went very badly. Now, I'm a man who can
okay,
hold...
that's a good story then.
I'm a man who can hold his drink very easily. We might get back to this later on, but of a night, dinner time, I'll have at least half a bottle of wine, at least, and sometimes more. And I can easily hold that. However, I went to a wine tasting at a local vineyard about 20 miles down the road last year or so, and it was 11 o'clock in the morning, and they were inviting us to sample their white wines. White wine's quite big in southern England now. And to my surprise, and they give a tiny little glass this size, but I started to drink and I just had a little sip at it, and I immediately felt woozy. I mean, really woozy.
Really?
It was enough sip to sort of better to drown a fly. It's a very, very small amount of alcohol. And I thought, hang on, there's something wrong with me. And I thought, hang on, it isn't. There isn't something wrong with me. There's something really right with me. Because one of the problems that alcoholics have, or one of the reasons that people go into alcoholism, is because they drink in the morning, and in the morning is the time you get the biggest hit from alcohol, because alcohol gets detoxified at different times of the day, called circadian rhythms. In the early morning, your ability to detoxify alcohol is at its lowest, and it gradually increases throughout the day. So by the time dinner time comes around at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, your enzymes, your detoxifying enzymes are at their fullest extent. And that's how you can manage to drink a huge amount of stuff, as I do in the evening. So it's fantastic. And
wow.
The other interesting thing too is that Mother Nature gives us a craving for alcohol at that time of the day when it's most able to detoxify it. So in the evenings, 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, we tend to, they call it wine o'clock, don't they? Oh,
yes.
Drink, yeah.
Call it Mommy's Little Helper. I used to. I try not to make those jokes now. But anyway.
But it's because Mother Nature wants you to drink. Or it says it gives you a craving for drink at that time of day, but it's actually that time of day, the very time of day when your enzymes are able to detoxify the alcohol most efficiently. So I think, we live in a wonderful world, and here's another example of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. I had never heard that before, and I love it. I love it that it's not just because I'm hangry, or it's what I call the arsenic hour, when you want to take arsenic or administer it to those around you. There's a reason Mother Nature equipped us to deal with alcohol then. All right. So how did your experience as a former BBC producer and then a medical columnist for the Sunday Times and other publications shape your approach to researching and writing about wine?
Well, at the BBC, one of the reasons I had to leave rather early, I took early retirement, was because the programmes that I did were generally anti-establishment. I found lots and lots of reasons to question scientific orthodoxy, and it was okay in the 70s and 80s because we'd all come out of university being radicals. And then I gradually found that the people who were coming into the BBC and becoming more senior to me were sort of casting a snook at the kind of the stuff I was doing, which was basically anti-establishment stuff. So I had to leave, took early retirement, and so many of my programs were very anti-establishment in the sense that I questioned the scientific dogma. And
was that about alcohol while you were at the BBC?
No, about lots of things, up to and including psychic functioning.
Oh.
Telepathy.
Telepathy.
Telepathy, etc., clairvoyance, which of course science said was complete rubbish, but actually in the 1980s in California, a lot of work was going on behind the scenes, secret work by the CIA and the Department of Defense using psychics to spy on Russia. That was classified information. I didn't know it then, but I was able to film the declassified information research. So, I mean, you had, on the one hand, science saying it's all rubbish, it must be, the idea that you can communicate with each other telepathically or clairvoyantly see at a distance has to be rubbish, because we know consciousness is within the brain, and therefore it can't be anywhere else. So I was making this. That's an example of a film I was making, the kind of films that I made that were anti-establishment. And my colleagues eventually got fed up with me, and I decided I had to leave. So I then went into medical journalism ultimately, where I did the same thing, finding differences between what the orthodox medical profession was saying about the evidence and challenging it where necessary. I did a lot of articles on cholesterol and statins and salt, all of these things that were said to be bad for you. And then I did an article on calories. And originally I was quite sceptical about the calorie theory anyway, because it seemed to me very crude.
The calorie theory being what?
Well, you calories in, calories out.
Right. The body as a furnace, burning those calories.
Yeah. And so I stumbled upon the fact that although alcohol is very high in calories, almost as high as fat, and I'm stroking a cat here.
Good to clarify that. Aw, cute cat.
Go away. Almost as high as fat. And yet, research showed that people who drink do not put on weight. Through the calories. They may put on weight by the more food they ingest from actually while they're drinking, because it gives you the munchies, but the actual alcohol itself does not put on weight. And there are loads of experiments on animals and human beings showing precisely that. If you substitute food calories for alcohol calories in a controlled condition, you will lose weight.
I'm surprised to hear that, because a lot of diets say kick the wine or whatever at the beginning, and alcohol is an easy fuel to burn. I don't know, maybe that actually underscores what you're saying rather than disagrees with it. So maybe we can clarify a little bit. Food is measured just correct me. I dropped science early in high school. But food is measured on the amount of glucose or sugar it produces. And the glycemic index indicates how quickly a particular food raises blood sugar levels compared to pure glucose or sugar. Bread has a glycemic index of 100. Beer, though, has maltose, another form of sugar from wheat or barley, has a glycemic index of 89, whereas a dry wine has a glycemic index of 0?
Correct. Now, the glycemic index is the alternatives theory to the calorie theory.
I see.
And it is, in my view, it is the one which is most likely to be correct. Because what glycemic index, as you say, measures is the glucose production of particular food. And it is glucose that gets stored as fat if you don't actually use the energy. So clearly that's a much better mechanism than the calorie theory, which, as you mentioned just now, burning food. There is actually, they actually measure calories by burning the food in a little container called a calorimeter. And so on the understanding that the body is like a furnace, and, you put coal in it, and you'll, etc. But, it's absolute nonsense. Clearly nonsense, because we, if that was the case, then we'd all be eating coal to put on weight, because coal is not biodigestible. Anyway, so it's a completely nonsense. And so even today, the calories are worked out by putting a particular food into this bomb calorimeter, which is so antiquated. It's sort of 19th century pseudoscience.
Right. And the body reacts differently depending on how the food was processed. And, we know that.
Well, of course. But
things like protein are, we actually burn more calories trying to consume it than we do, say, fast foods that are just don't take any effort to metabolize. Yeah.
Well, the glycemic index is the index that I use in the book. Because it's, in my view, the one most sensible, because it links up with the fact that alcohol doesn't put on weight, because alcohol has 0 calories in it. Sorry, scores 0 on the glycemic index. Absolutely 0. Right. Whereas beer, you may talk about beer bellies, a lot of men have beer bellies. Well, that's because of the maltose within beer. And maltose is not actually 89, as you just said, it's 120. It's more glucose producing than sugar itself.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Very, very glucose producing. So a wine has no maltose in it, as obviously we know.
Sure.
So this is why beer is very, very special, and why every culture knows that there's a beer belly. The Germans call it Abdul, and the French call it Abdul Kronenberg, and so every culture knows that people who drink beer to excess get beer bellies. It's all to do with the maltose, and all of these things sort of tie up, making one recognise that the glycemic index is actually the only way to measure food values in terms of
and as you say,
in terms of energy.
Yeah. And as you say in your book, we don't hear about the wine belly, but some sources say, is this correct? The body will preferentially burn alcohol first before it burns fat that we've stored in our cells, because alcohol is such a easy available fuel. Is that correct, or is that total bunk as well?
Well, I mean, you see, if you're using the term burn, which goes back to the bomb calorimeter.
The furnace thing, yeah.
The furnace thing. So actually, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it.
Right.
What is now clear is that alcohol itself is not bioavailable. In other words, the body doesn't recognise it as an energy source.
Okay.
It just uses
it just tries to process it and get it out.
To get stoned with.
Yes, indeed, which it's very good at doing. And just further background, insulin is secreted by the pancreas, which helps remove the glucose from the blood and deposits it into our cells, as you say, where it's stored as either fat or used as energy. What impact does alcohol have on the ability of our insulin to do this kind of conversion?
Well, the interesting thing about alcohol and insulin, which is why it's so good in diabetes, is it actually decreases the amount of insulin. Now that sounds paradoxical, but the evidence is very strong that people who drink have much less risk of diabetes considerable less risk. Now, why should lower insulin be a good marker for diabetes? Because diabetes comes as a result of insulin resistance, which is where the body produces too much insulin because it can't actually handle the turning it into glucose. So the body keeps on producing more and more insulin, and ends up with a state of insulin resistance, and then you get really full-blown diabetes. So the ideal is to have as little insulin as possible, because that means you have as little glucose, because the body is not actually producing the insulin to combat the glucose.
Okay, so
it's a little bit paradoxical.
Yeah. It is. But wine is not triggering glucose, and so therefore insulin isn't triggered to deal with the non-glucose, if you will. Okay, cool.
Correct.
And so
it's not just wine, it's all alcohol.
It's all alcohol, right. Yeah. I've got a one-track wine mind, but yes, we should.
All are.
And we should note that as we discuss these various findings that, we're talking about wine or alcohol in moderation, there are definitely negative impacts as you go into excess, but we'll get to that later. And so in your opinion then, or in the research, I should say, that you've discovered, then moderate wine consumption can help prevent diabetes?
Yes, it can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But heavy does the reverse. And
heavy does the reverse, yes.
Yeah, so in our conversation, we'll keep on finding this as a paradox. Yep. Little is good, moderate is good, too much is bad. And
like anything, right? Like water consumption can make you have hypertension because, raises blood pressure if you keep drinking to excess just of water itself. So
it actually blows your brains out too. Put water on the brain.
Wow.
That's how you die from it.
Oh, my goodness.
Too much water in the brain.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, be warned on water too. And so, but since we're on this topic, for those who are already diabetics, is dry, we're not talking sweet wine, which does have sugar, clearly will trigger glucose and an insulin response. But for dry white and red wines or sparkling, is that quote unquote safe if there are no other contraindicators for diabetics to consume?
It's not only safe, it's beneficial. A lot of studies
it's beneficial.
Oh yeah, okay. You can reduce it's
reducing your insulin.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So a lot of studies being done in Israel on this particularly. A small glass of red wine with a meal will reduce your what's it called the thing that your finger prick stuff. Insulin. Is it?
Oh yeah.
Anyway, it's very good for diabetics. Small amounts of alcohol being shown conclusively.
Okay, all right. So what motivated you to revisit the whole topic of alcohol and health a decade after your first book, The Good News About Booze? You returned and have this second book, The Very Good News About Wine.
Well, the first book I thought was a real kind of kick in the teeth to the establishment, medical establishment, as I showed very, very clearly that, as I've just discussed, small amounts of alcohol are very good for you. See where large amounts are not. And that while the guidelines were being increasingly reduced, I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. I know the evidence, and I know it and everybody else can know it. This stuff is really good for you in moderation. Why are you reducing the guidelines to such a level that actually no one's getting any benefit from the alcohol? And that annoyed me more and more. And then the people, particularly in England, it was in Britain, there's a lady called, I can't remember her now, but she on television saying there's not only no safe level of alcohol, there's no alcohol itself at any level is dangerous. And even people say wine is good for you. Oh no, she said, it's an old wives' tale. I thought, you're a bloody old wife yourself. This
not a childless cat lady. Never mind.
I mean, she was lying through her teeth. And so I thought, there's no point in rewriting the same book again. I'm going to concentrate on the second book on wine, where the evidence is really overwhelmingly positive in terms of its benefits for health.
Right.
And so I got the old title, Good News About Booze, The Very Good News About Wine. And And it's a slam dunk hit, because it's so easy to show that wine is good for you. Time and time again, study after study after study shows this stuff is really good news. It really
Absolutely.
is good news for your health.
And you've differentiated between wine and other alcohols in various chapters in this excellent book. In fact, you cite over 300 medical studies in it. What was the most challenging aspect of synthesizing decades of research on wine and health?
I think the problem is a lot of the evidence is heterogeneous. You get one study.
It's conflicting?
This thing.
Okay.
Yes, not seriously conflicting, but some people say it's very good if we take it an X amount, and other people say, well, we didn't find that, we thought it was X minus Y amount, we found X minus. So lots of different studies show different results, and so what you have to do is you have to synthesize all of the studies. Now, that's done for you quite easily, because a lot of people do what's called a meta-analysis, where they pool together all of the information and come up with a synthesis of what the totality of the evidence shows. And so what I did in the book was because I do like my wine, and I do want people to know that actually it is good for you, I have concentrated on individual studies where wine is good, really good for you. For example, the French women and breast cancer. I was astonished to find that they not only don't get breast cancer when they drink wine, they reduce their risk of breast cancer. Now that is what they call an outlier in the trade. It's an exceptionally favourable study in terms of wine and breast cancer.
Well, by how much? How much did they reduce?
Oh, no, I think it was actually, any amount actually was reduced.
Any amount of consumption. Okay.
Any amount, but they had to drink regularly every day.
I see. Okay.
So this is another interesting thing that the evidence is contrary to what the authorities say, just have one or two drinks of drink and then forget it. The evidence is completely to the contrary. You really need to drink every day for maximum health.
Wow.
Little and often. I mean, it's extraordinary. So the guidelines are completely the inverse of what the evidence says.
Absolutely.
Oh
my goodness! And
so anyway, with the meta-analysis. So what in the book, I have this. I'm very careful to say, study X and study XY showed really these remarkably favourable results. On the other hand, looking at totality, there's this kind of outcome, and the outcome generally is in the same direction but more muted. So the meta-analyses on breast cancer and wine do not show that you will reduce your risk of breast cancer when you drink 25 bottles of wine. They will not show that.
Right.
But
sure.
The French data show that.
Absolutely. And do you think there is any risk that the French study might be biased because the wine industry is so important to France, even if the wine industry didn't fund research, which you found that consistently the alcohol industry is not funding this research. It's coming from governments and universities. But I think France, oh my God, what could, if there's any bias, could it have been in that study at all?
I suppose, knowing Frenchmen as I do, and I don't know many French scientists personally, but I know a lot of Frenchmen, and of course, they all love their wine. I suppose it's possible. These are, for example, work for the equivalent of the NIH. They're top-level scientists. An institution called INSERM.
Right.
And you generally wouldn't find people at that sort of academic level fabricating the data. And they might have an unconscious bias, but you've got to really fabricate the data before you start. Yeah.
The data is
so I think
data.
the answer is yes, of course, Frenchmen love their wine, and no, they don't fake their results.
And I think you already answered this. I was going to ask, how did you check your own bias to avoid cherry-picking studies that sort of go along with your own love of wine? But you've already said you did focus on positives, but then you compared that to the meta-analysis, which would say, okay, this is a really strong positive result, and here's how it compares to many studies grouped together under this meta-analysis, so that it was always in the context of what's happening overall.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, good. And you used for the difference, one of the big differences between this and your first book was Google Scholar. How did it help you write this second book?
The first book, it was a medical library, a big one in London, where I was allowed to Xerox papers after papers after papers for about $5 a day, ridiculously cheap. But since then, there's also a thing called PubMed, which is, did the same thing online. And then Google Scholar came along and allowed you access to every single scientific paper published since 1850.
Wow.
Every scientific paper.
So you were able to look at like
fields.
thousands.
In all fields of study, of science. It's unbelievable. And some of the time you can only get the abstract, the summary of it, and then you have to pay for the full paper. But by and large, they will give you the full paper, so you can read the detail of the paper. And it's, it makes making writing books like this a doddle. It also makes it easy for people to check up on what I've written, because everything I've said is referenced. So if you don't believe me, then go to Google Scholar, type in the reference, and you'll read it. It's very boring reading, but you'll find that I'm right.
Well, thank you, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, I think it is, Google. So for all their faults, that is quite a public service.
For all their faults, yeah.
Now, you mentioned in the book that wine was once prescribed in UK hospitals, I believe in North America too, by physicians during the Prohibition era when alcohol was banned. Why do you think they did that?
Well, why do you think?
Well, because of some of the benefits that we're discussing.
Yeah, and I mean, there was no science about it then. Just doctors noticed it. The life assurance actuaries noticed that first in America. They saw that people who were regular moderate drinkers lived longer than people who weren't. So that was the first hint, in about the 1920s. And then I think doctors picked up on that too.
Well, and I think there were a lot of patients who suddenly developed certain illnesses that were ill-defined, but they were confident could be healed with a prescription of wine.
And also, apparently, the churches were allowed to serve wine, and so a lot of people became Catholics suddenly.
Lots of converts, I can only imagine. So we're all skirting around this whole issue up till now, moderation. What is the ideal amount and pattern of wine consumption for maximum health benefits? Now, I know it differs by disease and by women and men, and we'll get into all that, but maybe at a high level you could tell us what moderation is.
The recent Czechoslovakian study of the whole database, about 2018, came to the conclusion that for men, the maximum optimum intake of wine per day was 60 grams. That's 2/3 of the bottle. And women half that. That was the maximum optimal level. In other words, you can drink up to that level, and then beyond that, it starts to tail off. I'm not sure they're right actually, because the Italians live a lot longer, drink a lot more than that, and live very long. So, but still, that was looking at the totality again, the meta-analysis, the totality of the evidence.
And maybe this is nitpicking, or it hasn't been defined, but 2/3 of a bottle of 8%, say, low alcohol wine versus a 14 or 15% wine, does that make a huge difference when we're talking?
It does. Well,
okay.
No.
How does it change?
It's obviously the more alcohol within it, the more toxic.
I just wondered
toxic it becomes.
How much it went up to. Okay.
Well, you can do the maths yourself.
Oh, no, I don't do math anymore. Excuse me. Science and math. Sorry, I shouldn't admit that. Okay, so what are the different? Okay, you talked about the differences between men and women in terms of what is moderation, 2/3 of a bottle versus half for women. We've heard various theories. Women have more fat or more water, less muscle than men. We're smaller. Or we have not the right or fewer digestive enzymes. Is it a combination, or is there one factor there that makes the recommended dose, if you will, for women lower than men?
The major factor is the enzymes. the detoxifying enzymes. Now, why the good Lord did this, I don't know. You better ask him.
It's unfair.
But you know,
Childbirth too. I've got a bone to pick with him. It's clearly him. Anyway.
I mean, I don't think anybody knows, but these are the facts. Women have fewer detoxifying enzymes, and as I said, there's the body weight and the body fat and so on and so forth to take into account.
Okay.
But, I mean, that's the major factor.
Just it is what it is. All right. How do wine's health benefits differ in younger versus older adults, and/or our tolerances for alcohol as we age?
The evidence shows that actually the older you are, the more beneficial it becomes and the more you can tolerate. And
the more you can tolerate.
Yes.
I hear people saying all the time, now that I'm older, it goes right to my head.
However, for women, again, I've a lot of postmenopausal friends of mine have this problem. As soon as they got the change,
Yeah, all the fun went out of life, yes. Great.
But in terms of the actual evidence for health benefits, the older you are, the more you can take and the more beneficial it is for your health.
Why is it more beneficial? Is there any sort of top line as to why it becomes more beneficial?
Pass. I mean, it's a work from Denmark. The Danes are very, very big on alcohol research. They spend trillions of kroners on it. But I don't think they found out why. They just look at the epidemiological evidence.
Sure. Okay, let's get into heart. Before we dive into the relationship between wine or alcohol and heart disease, just want to share a few points about scientific study results for those of us who did not study science beyond high school. They're often reported on a graph that shows the relationship between two factors, as you do in your book, Tony, with the risk of getting heart disease increasing up the vertical axis, or the vertical line, or the x-axis, versus the amount of wine consumption increasing as you go out along the horizontal line, or the y-axis. You have a picture of that in your book?
I have pictures of this in my book, and I've done some drawings for your
your own PowerPoint slides here. Okay, let's see. Oh yes, there are the lines. There's the straight line up, meaning it would start at the lower left and go up to the horizontal right.
This is more risk of illness, death, longevity, whatever, and zero risk. Okay.
Right. Straight linear relationship.
That's, for example, if you smoke. The more cigarettes you smoke, the number of cigarettes you smoke there, the more damage it'll cause, and the more risk of dying you'll have here. Okay.
Right. Yes.
That's smoking.
Okay.
And that's what the anti-alcohol people say about alcohol. They say the more alcohol you drink, the
more risk.
There's no such thing as a safe level. They'll say stick to that.
Zero.
However, the truth is...
PowerPoint slide 2.
Ta-da!
Oh, here comes that famous J-curve, I believe. There you go. Okay, let me just say a few words about that. The J-curve, J-shaped curve, where initially the line falls, meaning, say, your risk of heart disease decreases as you consume more wine. Then it gradually starts to rise at higher levels of consumption. J-curve, of course, is far more nuanced. And as I've demonstrated, not you, much harder to communicate versus that straight line of advice where the more you drink, the greater your risk, which is not true. So what about this J-curve? It's showing basically that there are benefits for heart disease with consuming wine up to a certain point. What is that?
So in other words, you have a decreased risk of heart disease.
Yep.
Say, I mean, an example of wine, so there'd be about a bottle and a half of wine from men there, roughly. So as you drink a bit more, as you drink a little bit, say half a bottle of wine, you maximise your decreased risk.
Right, the lowest part of the
disease.
J, the dip
and
down.
As you drink more, and this is about a bottle and a half here.
Bottle and a half, you come back up to the zero as if you didn't drink at all.
In other words, there's exactly the same level as people who don't drink. So, of heart disease.
All right. So when it comes to heart disease, it's better to have some wine in moderation than none at all, at least according to the J-curve.
Absolutely. And diabetes, the same thing.
Okay. Another J curve. All right.
Another J curve. Now, it's mainly diabetes and heart disease with this very strong J curve effect.
Okay. Okay. Fascinating. Okay. So red wine seems to have the most health benefits due to the polyphenols that protect plants from disease and sun damage. These polyphenols also help us counter the free radicals in our own bodies that cause aging and disease. White wine has, I think, only 1/12 of the benefits of red wine. We always hear the story that we heard the story back in the 80s or 90s on that show, 60 Minutes, the investigative television show. It was all about the resveratrol, and red wine sales surged. But how much would we have to drink to get the health benefits from resveratrol? Would we be dead?
I was in my first book, I was very pro resveratrol. Because the evidence was pointing in that direction, but mainly from one source, University of Leicester in England. And then the more I looked at it from the second book, the wine book, the more I realised that they were over-egging the pudding somewhat. And in fact, the totality of the evidence is you've got to drink an awful lot of resveratrol in order to get any health benefit from it at all.
How much would you have to drink?
What was I don't remember the actual. Forget.
I've heard ridiculously high, like I don't know, 80 bottles or something. I don't know.
20 bottles certainly.
20 bottles, okay.
Yeah.
Still enough to kill you.
20 litres, I think.
Okay.
To get some benefit, which is obviously unthinkable and undrinkable.
Right.
So, and it's in Alzheimer's too. They've found that resveratrol has an effect on Alzheimer's patients, but again, they've got to drink 10 times that. So that's sort of 200 litres to get the same amount. So,
right.
But what's now recognised is that it's the totality of the polyphenols in wine. It's not just resveratrol.
Okay.
They picked up on that first because red wine has lots of it and white wine has virtually none. So they thought, it must be that. And a lot of studies, and they it's a kind of group think about it. And I think the group think is now ebbing away. And the general opinion amongst these experts is that it's the totality of the polyphenols within wine, which are, red wine contains, 1,000 polyphenols.
Wow.
And it's the interaction of these polyphenols with each other that actually produces a beneficial effect.
And polyphenols are, of course, natural compounds. Do they include the color pigments and tannins and
all of that
resveratrol,
stuff, yeah.
of course? And they're interacting with each other, but also it's also the combination with alcohol itself, right?
Now that's the interesting thing. And in my chapter on zero alcohol wines,
right,
which is a brand new one for this book, I thought, well, I had just researched it completely blind. I had no expectation of finding what I did find. And Google Scholar, okay, what has he got for us? And I was astonished. I assumed that having taken the alcohol out of wine, you'd at least get some benefit from the detoxification in there.
Right.
But actually, the reverse is the case. In every conceivable area that they've done research on, they've done clinical trials on individuals in laboratories, giving them fake wine and real wine, alternating, and looking at the biomarkers of what, in urine and blood and so on, the kind of beneficial things that occur to work out whether these things are having any beneficial effect. And I was astonished to read that every single study to do with heart disease, diabetes, blah, showed that you have got to have the alcohol with the wine in order to have the beneficial effect.
Wow.
Zero alcohol wine is fine. If you don't want to get any benefit from it, fine, nothing wrong with it.
Right.
But you will lose out on the benefits. So there's obviously some synergistic connection between the polyphenols and alcohol, and this is, it's a very exciting area of research.
Yeah.
They're only just working on this now, and I think in one of the questions you're going to ask me, you have asked it now, is that I think this area of research is going to be really fascinating to work out what that connection is between the polyphenols and the alcohol. This is a really mind-numbing discovery, really, because it's counterintuitive. You wouldn't expect it to happen.
Right.
So,
You'd think it'd be like drying out food and compressing it to its vitamin source. And you think, well, why aren't the vitamins still there? But it needs that active component of alcohol. Alcohol also delivers flavor. I think it's what enlivens wine. But, it's got the health aspect too. So for non-alcohol or alcohol-free wines, they're just neutral. We shouldn't expect the health benefits, but they're not like worse for us, are they?
Relatively, yes.
Okay.
Relatively speaking, yeah, relatively. Because obviously,
okay.
in relatively to a moderate drinker.
Moderate drinking, yes.
Yeah.
So they're good for if you're trying to pace yourself and not go to excess on alcohol, like if you're kind of alternating maybe a glass with alcohol, without, or whatever. But sometimes, too, they can be high in sugar and additives and other things because they have to find some way to put in body and flavor when you remove the alcohol. So there is that, too.
In my chapter, I showed that actually some of the studies they've done in laboratories, some people refused to take part. They would not drink non-alcohol, zero-alcohol wine. It was disgusting. I mean, I've actually tried it. It is disgusting.
Yes, I have. Well, no, I have to disagree. I have found some good ones, and I do recommend them for those who are trying to pace themselves or, of course, can't drink because of all kinds of reasons. But anyway, I am not a temperance gal. That's not me. So anyway, but that's fascinating. What positive health effects were buried in the Harvard and/or Cambridge studies?
On heart disease.
On heart disease, yes, I believe, unless I'm mixing them up there.
The major Harvard has been a very, very big centre of research ever since the 1970s, 80s. They were the first people to do some research in a town called Framingham in Massachusetts. Now, Framingham was where they started just after the Second World War to recruit all of the population of this little town and study their medical records in detail. And it's a long-term project. It's still going on now, 50 years later. And the Harvard people found... Oh, that's right. It was a government project. The government said to them, "Okay, go on. We were interested in heart disease. This study's been going for a few years now. This is about the 1950s. Go and see what's happening with heart disease." Okay, they said. Hopped off to Framingham, looked at all of the data, and they were astonished. They came back and said, "Well, Mr. Government, NIH presumably, what we found very, very clearly is that people who drink alcohol, any kind of alcohol, have less heart disease." The NIH went into a fury and said, "You're not thinking of publishing this, are you?" We said, "Of course we are." We said, we forbid it. You will not publish this."
Really?
And so
wow.
And they said, if you do publish it, just say alcohol has no effect. So the Harvard people kept their cool and said, "Well, we're not publishing."
Wow.
So then they waited for all the people at NIH to leave or be fired or whatever, and then they finally published it about 10 years later. So Harvard's been a great centre for this research into heart disease, and I think they've done a lot of work since, and they were one of the first people to show, also British people did, that actually heart disease is reduced significantly.
Was it by 25%? Reduced risk of 25% in that
about
one?
that,
Yeah, okay. Wow.
And that's all alcohol. All alcohol,
right.
It's not just wine. But in wine, it's actually even better, as you'd expect.
How much better, or did it go down?
The J curve. The J curve for
is more pronounced.
Yeah, no, less pronounced.
Less pronounced.
Say that's the J curve for heart disease and alcohol.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
The J curve for heart disease and wine is...
Oh, it goes further out. Like you can drink more before you get into trouble. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay, gotcha. Yes. Okay. Wow. Now, the idea, I think, in your book that wine might be better than many vitamin supplements is striking. How does wine's nutrient composition give it such a health advantage over synthetic supplements or vitamins we take from the drugstore?
I'm not sure that I might slightly have exaggerated that because but certainly,
or maybe I am. But,
polyphenols
right.
packed together in wine have this huge punch, which I suspect is stronger than a punch of a multivitamin supplement.
Right.
Sorry, I'm not.
No, that's all good. I might have phrased that in such a way to exaggerate it. But let's move on to cancer, because that's an important one. We touched on breast cancer, but again, you note that the wine consumption can increase the risk of certain cancers, of course, mouth, throat, esophagus, which makes sense given that these areas are most directly exposed to unprocessed alcohol that our liver hasn't dealt with. As well, cancer risk escalates dramatically when alcohol is combined with smoking. More than 4,000 chemicals have been identified in cigarette smoke. About 250 of them are known health hazards, and more than 50 are carcinogens. Cigarette smoke also contains highly reactive free radicals, which promote reactive oxygen species. Tobacco smoke interacts with our oral bacteria, turning alcohol into the carcinogen acetaldehyde.
Acetaldehyde.
There you go. Thank you. Interestingly, though, you note that wine also kills plaque in the mouth and therefore might, I guess, help reduce cavities. Is it also hard on the enamel, like with all that acidity and tannin, especially red wine?
I don't know.
Don't know. Okay. That just occurred to me as I was reading through. But let's keep on to cancer. I get distracted like a squirrel when it comes to science. You also write that wine can actually decrease the risks of certain cancers, such as kidney, thyroid, and blood cancers like leukemia. How does it decrease, generally speaking, the risk of these latter types of cancers?
I don't think anybody knows, to be honest.
Okay.
And you can also add lung cancer to that one.
Oh, wow.
Wine.
Okay.
A really, really strange finding. Because lung cancer, as we know, is really an intractable cancer.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
how wine does it, I don't think anybody knows. But the evidence is really very strong.
Okay.
So it is surprising. And
It
the
is.
other cancers you've mentioned, the blood cancers, again, surprising that those are reduced because where does alcohol go? Into the bloodstream. Why
Right.
should blood cancers be reduced with this toxin in your bloodstream?
Right.
Makes no sense. But the
Yeah.
fact is that epidemiologically it is true. And nobody knows because actually they're not bothering to investigate. They don't want to find out because they want you not to drink.
Right.
They don't
Because
want
it's
to
just
know. They don't want to tell you that it reduces certain cancers. So why should they investigate it?
Right. And we'll get to that nanny state patronizing kind of approach to it's just simpler to tell people not to drink versus the nuanced message of that J curve where
Exactly,
there are some benefits in moderation, but people,
yeah.
of course, can't be trusted with their own adult choices. What did the Mayo Clinic, respected nonprofit U.S.-based research and treatment center, find in its study about women and red wine?
Found it was remarkable because they looked at the French data and obviously thought to themselves, like you did, the French, they blame their wine too much. So, and then they
Yes,
did
sir.
a study of Californian women. No, pulled together of about 7 or 8 different studies in the USA on all women across the USA, all wine drinkers, and have found the same thing, that there was a reduced risk of breast cancer. A slight reduced risk of, it's only a slight, nothing as big as the French, but still significant in the right direction.
And maybe, I don't know, if the French found more of an impact because of that so-called Mediterranean diet of healthy fruits and vegetables in combination with wine and not rushing your meals and less fast food and perhaps.
More than certainly.
Je ne sais pas. But to understand what these studies are reporting and why headlines can seem so scary when in fact the data is not, I think we also need to understand absolute risk versus relative risk. Again, jump in here, correct me, Tony, but if I get this mucked up. But absolute risk is the probability of something occurring in a specific group, while relative risk is the comparison of that risk happening between two groups. So I'll make up an example. If one person out of 100 people who does not drink wine gets cancer, the absolute risk is 1%, 1 out of 100. If two people out of 100 people who do drink wine get cancer, the absolute risk would be 2%, 2 people. However, the relative risk of getting cancer for those who drink, in this fabricated study, who drink wine, compared to those who do not drink wine is double, or 100%, because the number went from 1 person to 2 people. So the more dramatic seeming relative risk is often what grabs headlines versus the rather, I would say, nothing burger of absolute risk. Is that a very basic understanding of what we often see reported?
Yes, that's correct. Basically, everybody uses relative risk, particularly the pharmaceutical industry, because it amplifies the apparent benefit of their drugs. All scientific research is expressed in relative risk. So, which is why I'm aware of the fact that absolute certainly does reduces the bottom, not only the dangers of breast cancer, for example, if you drink, but also reduces the benefits of breast cancer if you drink. So you've relative increases and absolute decreases. So you've got your plus or minus a little bit, as you say, nothing burger to a certain extent. But so rather than going into that, to be honest, the book should have mentioned relative risk, absolute risk, all the way through. But because everybody else does relative risk, all the publications are in relative risk, all the pharmaceutical companies are in relative risk. So I thought I'd better go along with the flow and be honest about it. Yeah.
Then you're comparing apples to apples. It's the currency of our headlines.
Yeah.
What I found really fascinating was the connection between folate and cancer risk in wine drinkers. As background, folic acid and folate are both terms for the vitamin B9, but they differ in how they're absorbed by the body. Folate is the natural form of the vitamin B9 and occurs in certain foods such as leafy greens, citrus fruits, and beans. Folic acid is the synthetic form of B9, often found in supplements and vitamins. Alcohol depletes our natural folate, and since the body does not store folic acid or folate, it needs to be replaced daily through food or supplements. Folate deficiency is common and can lead to serious complications like anemia and birth defects. What did a Denmark study show about taking folate and cancer risk?
Well, it wasn't just Denmark. It's actually about 10 different countries have found the same thing. This is really interesting for women. As you say, folate is depleted by alcohol. And again, Harvard have done an awful lot of work on this. If you give folate to women in supplement form, women drinkers, they will reduce their risk of breast cancer massively, sometimes so to the extent of completely wiping out the risk. Now, the risk is pretty low in the first place, but in some studies, so completely zero risk. And so, I'm not advising women, I'm simply reporting on what the evidence says. The evidence is overwhelming that if you take folate supplements, 400 micrograms a day, you will almost completely knock out your risk of breast cancer if you drink. And you see, if the health authorities really had any concern for our health, they wouldn't go on banging on about limits and so on. They'd say, if you overindulge, take folate. We don't mind if you drink, but just don't drink too much. And if you do drink too much, take some folate. And this applies to many of the cancers. The ones in the head and neck that you mentioned, also massively reduced if you take folate.
I didn't know that. Wow. And the good news is that folate is based on B, and it's not fat soluble, so we don't store it, we don't overdose on it. We'll just create expensive P if we take too much. So there doesn't seem to be a downside.
I don't think you can have too much folate, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Because
400
micrograms.
Okay.
Micrograms, MCG. Micrograms, yeah.
I went on the hunt. This is just a personal question, but are there any brands you recommend, or what do you have a brand you take? Because it's hard to find folate versus not folic acid. Like
it is.
It is really. I had to go online. So
the one I use is American. American company called Solgar. S for sugar, Olgar. They have been in the business in the business for about 40 years. See, one has to be very careful with supplements.
Right.
There are a lot of con men out there.
Yes.
Telling, that there's. I mean, I did some work. One of the things I did for What Doctors Don't Tell You was investigating some of this, and there are only 1 or 2 companies in the world and we actually analysed all their stuff.
What was in it? Yeah. I never buy anything consumable off Amazon you never know what you're getting off there. The online stores.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Oh, okay. But from the Solgar store, presumably, like it's a direct.
Store,
yeah. Okay. Cool.
And in England, the best one is Lambert's. Lamberts. Lambert's.
I'm going to put links to those in the show notes because I'm sure people will be interested.
But Lambert's don't do folate, unfortunately.
Oh, they don't?
So I don't. No.
Oh, okay.
So the one I buy is Solgar.
Solgar. All right. Cool. All right. We'll put that in there. I want to tackle dementia next. How might wine protect against cognitive decline and dementia, and I guess also Alzheimer's disease?
Well, the evidence is pretty strong that it does. Wine in particular.
Okay.
All alcohols do to a certain extent. But wine in particular, a big Swedish study showed this, that women who drank exclusively wine had a 75% reduced risk of Alzheimer's.
Wow.
A lot of other studies are true in Denmark. So, and also, now we know this is true because they've done work on animals, rats, mice.
Okay.
And they've given them, lucky things, they've given them some wine to drink in there. And then unlucky things, they had to be killed.
But they were the happiest in the lab up to a point.
They were happy up to that point. They researched, looked at their brains, and they found, although it's only a connection between Alzheimer's and amyloid plaques in the brain, it's not causative, but they are connected. We know that one is joined to the other. Whether one causes the other, neither here nor there. But they found in the rat the amyloid plaques were reduced in the rats that drank wine. So we know there's a biological mechanism there.
Right.
And also MRI scans have been done on human beings where the brain volume is increased in wine drinkers.
Increased more neurons?
Yeah.
And more synaptical connections? Okay.
All of that stuff, yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, and the plaques being what starts to gum up the brain and cause these cognitive declines. So you're getting rid of that, just like with heart disease, you're getting rid of plaque in other areas with wine. Wow, 75%. Because 2/3 of those diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's are women. It's an autoimmune disease. So that's really one of the few good things, I guess, the big guy in the sky designed into us. So it's protective. Is it at 20 grams of alcohol for roughly speaking, for this sort of cognitive aspect?
It's about that. Yeah, 25 grams.
Okay. Should be a third of a bottle?
No, of course, a third of a bottle, yeah.
Yeah, a third of a bottle. Okay, cool. And what I also found striking was, I think you mentioned that alcohol also helps decrease arthritis, which is, of course, inflammation and affects women as well. How does, that seems counterintuitive in my mind because I think of alcohol as a vasodilator. How is it reducing inflammation?
I don't know, and I don't think they do.
Okay.
But they've definitely found it. They've done X-rays of people who drink compared to X-rays of people who don't drink, and they have more of the actual inflammation showing up on the X-rays. So it's an objective effect.
Wow. Okay. We hear the headlines: lifespan, how long you live, versus health span, how well you live in the life that you have. Why do you think wine plays such an important part in the longevity puzzle for certain populations overall? Like we've talked about the various diseases, so all of that's contributing. But is there anything else? Like, is it? I don't know. Are they just living a slower, more well-paced life because they're drinking wine and getting together with people, stress, all that sort of stuff?
I think so. I mean, it's particularly true in Mediterranean areas,
right,
where the Mediterranean diet and where wine is an integral part of the Mediterranean diet. And as you say, lifestyle, sociability and so on also counts. But Italian researchers have told me that in their experience, it represents 15% of the value of a Mediterranean diet. That's a lot. So in other words, if you don't, I mean, they've done work on Italians who don't drink, but also Mediterranean diet, compared them. So the wine is an essential part of the Mediterranean diet, and it does account for longevity.
All right. Well, liver, the one last organ we'll deal with. You mentioned that heavy wine drinkers in Italy often experienced fewer liver issues than anticipated. Can you explain what else they found? Was it genetic factors that protect this population, or is there some sort of positive impact when it comes to liver? And of course, we hear about cirrhosis when there's too much heavy drinking. Finland was another study that happened, or that found some what you would expect to find.
Well, the extraordinary thing is that about 95% of drinkers, even heavy drinkers, never get liver cirrhosis. Never get it. Even alcoholics, about 13% never get it. Never.
Okay.
So there's something odd about the people who do get liver disease and compared to the people who don't. Some kind of genetic, you say, issue there.
Yeah.
Those of us who don't get it are lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to these studies that are so problematic and create these headlines. In 2023, the World Health Organization, or the WHO, declared no level of alcohol consumption is safe for our health. They didn't differentiate between different types of people, gender, or types of alcohol. They also ignored some evidence from their own researchers, I believe. You called it a de facto prohibition. What were the flaws, and why did they make this announcement, and what was the fallout?
Well, the flaws are obvious because if you read my book, you'll see the flaws were there. But I think they simply have an agenda. They have a real people-hating agenda, the WHO.
People-hating?
People-hating.
They don't want us to have fun?
They don't, exactly. And they're puritanical. And it goes along with the sort of temperance movement that's all over the globe. Just an example. The woman who's made this point in the WHO, what she said was, the one thing we can say for sure is that the more you drink, the more harmful it is. In other words, the less you drink, the safer it is.
Well, that's contradicting herself.
Yeah. No, it's contradicting yourself. It's contradicting the evidence.
Yeah.
But listen to this. This is her job description. Her name is Karina Ferreira Borges. She's program manager for alcohol, illicit drugs, and prison health. Now,
that's got to give you a dim view of life.
So she obviously thinks alcohol is an illicit drug and thinks we all ought to be in prison for drinking it.
Well, there is something to be said for the fact that, obviously people in this organization, but also doctors generally see the downside of alcohol and everything else in life consistently. They don't see happy, positive people who are drinking wine in moderation and saying, hey, just checking in with you, got no issues. So it's got to affect your view of some of these things when all you see are the problems associated with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Which is probably why they're against it.
Right. And no fun to have at a dinner party at all.
Well, except doctors do drink a huge amount.
Right.
They
secretly.
Do,
Yeah. I believe it.
There's a doctors' organisation, as a charity, as an actual charitable concern called something like Charity for Drunken Doctors or something like that.
Wow.
And it's a kind of self-help group of people. And the stories doctors. In my last book, I quoted a guy saying, I had to drink vodka because it wouldn't smell on my breath, and I couldn't drive to work anymore. I had to go by bicycle to work, and I'd end up every day in the hedge, completely rat-assed.
Okay, that's not who you want to go talk to. But then again, maybe less of a... Yeah, fewer of us would lie to our doctors.
They say, what's the definition of an alcoholic? Someone who drinks less than their doctor. Sorry, more than their doctor. Don't spoil the joke. Forget it. Rub it out.
No, gotcha. But yeah, all of it. I think a lot of us are loath to tell our doctors just how much we drink, how little we exercise and all the rest of it about fruit and vegetables. But anyway, that's a whole other rabbit hole. In 2023, Ireland passed legislation to put the following warning on all alcohol labels, including wine, starting in 2026. Quote, there is a direct link between alcohol and fatal cancers, liver disease, and alcohol consumption during pregnancy. The labels will be printed in red capital letters in Times New Roman bold type on a white background. The text will occupy most of the space on the label and be positioned in the center. They'll also include information about the number of calories and grams of alcohol in the product. Anything else? Like, why did this happen in Ireland first? Do you think other countries will follow suit?
Sadly, yes. The thing is that Ireland is being used as a test bed for lots of policies generated by the European Union and also the World Economic Forum. Both of them are in concert with each other. And Ireland being a small country and generally kind of accepting population, they are a test bed for these nonsensical ideas. I mean, they've recently had a huge influx of immigration just thrust upon them, much to the annoyance of the but it's again the Great Reset. You've heard of the Great Reset, haven't you? You know what I mean by the Great Reset?
And then finally, oh no, please! I should have jumped in there with a clarifying question.
You know the
please.
Great Reset?
No, I do not know the Great Reset.
Oh, the Great Reset was something that the World Economic. You heard of the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, at Davos.
At Davos, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the guy who runs that is a sinister man called Klaus Schwab.
Oh, sounds like a villain. Go ahead.
He is a villain. He sounds like a Bond villain. He speaks like this, and he says, oh, he does. He said, well, you know, we have got so many contacts all over the world, and all of we have our young leaders who have come to learn our techniques of how to manipulate the population. He didn't say that, but that's what he meant. And he said, we have already penetrated many cabinets, and we have half of our members in the cabinet of Canada, for example. So, I mean,
wow.
They are a global, sinister group of people who want to take over the world, and they're using Ireland as a test bed for these draconian policies like mass immigration and alcohol labelling and so on. It's all part and parcel of this UNWEF conspiracy. I hate to use the word, but there are it is conspiracy.
Well, as long as money's involved, there's always motivations, and I'll just say this is our opinion only. We are both journalists, critics. Please don't sue me, Mr. Bond villain. But speaking of Canada...
He's word worse than that. He's word worse than that, let me tell you.
Okay, all right, great. I'm glad he's conditioned to whatever kind of... constructive criticism he's received. We want to go. You mentioned Canada, my home place as well. Felicity Carter, whom I think is one of the best wine journalists on the planet, has been writing about wine and health for years. And in an excellent article, she reported, and I'm quoting here, that in 2020, Health Canada asked the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, the CCSA, to revamp national drinking guidelines. When their recommendations were released in January 2023, there was an immediate outcry. So controversial were the findings that people should stick to just 2 drinks per week or less that even the anti-addiction specialists denounced them. At first, the recommendations were never adopted. As a result, the recommendations were never adopted. In fact, Health Canada's guidelines remain the same as they were in 2011. Up to 2 drinks a day for women, 3 drinks for men. 14, 21, respectively, per week. 3 of the Canadian researchers behind the failed recommendations are now involved in writing the U.S. guidelines. She further quotes Professor Dan Malik of the Department of Health Sciences at Brock University in Ontario, who wrote in the Globe and Mail newspaper, quote, although reports have suggested that the guidelines are based on nearly 6,000 peer-reviewed studies, strict criteria ruled out all but 16 of these studies. And in their mathematical modeling. In other words, the CCSA based their recommendations on a relatively narrow understanding of how alcohol functions. Professor Malik ended by saying the guidelines were worse than useless or reckless. The guidelines are so divorced from reality they might drive people to ignore public health suggestions altogether. And in my opinion, it's like declaring that there's no safe level of flying. There isn't, by the way, so we should all stop flying. Not. The researchers involved had either volunteered or accepted travel or hospitality from Movendi, which is a temperance group founded in 1860, known as the International Organization of Good Templars, and they have a mandate for complete abstinence, no matter what the science says. To underscore those points, how was bias introduced into this study? So this made headlines, not just in Canada, but around the world, and obviously now it's affecting U.S. What were the problems of this? Cherry picking is probably first and foremost. They used 16 studies out of, 6,000. Do you want to expand on that a little bit about the flaws and problems with this study, Tony?
The man behind this is a man who is known to all of us in the pro-alcohol movement as the greatest scientific anti-alcohol activist of the lot. His name is Tim Stockwell. I won't give him the title of doctor, but he has a doctorate, God knows what. But he has a doctorate in very good PR as well, but a doctorate in very poor science. The study that you're talking about came out last year, and it's to do with all-cause mortality. And what he found was, what he claimed to find, was there was no benefit from alcohol whatsoever. But what he'd done, it was called a meta-analysis. As I mentioned earlier, a meta-analysis is meant to pull together all of the studies that have been done. You weed out the ones that are not very high quality, obviously, blah, duplications and so on. But you try and incorporate the whole lot, otherwise you get a completely distorted picture. Yes. And obviously this is what he wanted to end up with, a completely distorted picture, because what he did was, the study had 3,230 studies to look at. They analysed only 107.
Oh.
And found, to no one's surprise, that they obviously discarded all the ones that showed that there was a longevity benefit from alcohol, and then they came up with the answer that there wasn't any. He did the same thing in 2016, where he had looking at heart disease. Again, alcohol and heart disease. There were 2,662 studies. He chose only 6 to look at. And he came to the conclusion that one should be sceptical about the benefits of heart disease with alcohol. Well, I think we should be sceptical about the benefits of Mr. Stockwell, frankly.
Absolutely. It's not just cherry picking. There is no fresh or new research. He was just analysing and then cherry picking. No original research there. And no wonder Health Canada rejected the recommendations. It's kind of scary, though, that now he's, I guess, one of the 3 who's advising the U.S. on revised guidelines.
I know the U.S. is actually really very good until 2016. They had a recommendation to drink up to 28 grams of alcohol a day, which is a quarter of a bottle of wine a day.
Wow.
They had a recommendation said it should. The part of a healthy diet should be to avoid crap food and eat lots of fruits and vegetables, but also have a moderate intake of alcohol. And they specified 28 grams a day, which is very moderate, but obviously it's in the right direction. And then that was in 2016, and then in 2020 they got someone new on the board who didn't recommend drinking alcohol. They took that bit out. They didn't actually say don't drink it. They just said we won't recommend it as part of a healthy diet. And then now it's going to get even worse. The whole thing is utterly corrupt. It's all politicized. It's not science, it's pseudoscience. It's joke science, and it's
and who's benefiting?
It's an insult to our health.
Intelligence, too.
And our intelligence. An insult to the evidence.
Absolutely. Science is science. Who's benefiting? What? Again, where's the money? Like, who's getting something out of this?
Well, I think it's the temperance movement. I don't think there's any money involved, frankly. The alcohol industry...
So usually...
I know it is normally money, but it's also politics as well, like, Iraq wars and all that stuff. But
right.
I think there's a general anti-having fun movement. They don't want us to fly anymore because apparently causes global warming, which is actually bloody nonsense. So, but everything that they want to do to us, and I mean do to us, not for us, to us, is to prevent us enjoying ourselves, having fun, travelling anywhere, just having an enjoyable life. They want to control it, so the elites can fly in their private jets and drink as much alcohol as they want, and then say, look down on the rest of us poor serfs who aren't allowed to have any fun at all. I mean, I really do. I do think it's as simple as that. It's a new prohibition. It's a new Puritanism. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, it is a way of taking power by implementing guidelines or regulations or laws that dive deeper and deeper into people's lives. I mean, if you've chosen a career that is not about money, like you're not in the private sector, I'm grossly generalizing, then maybe it is about how what change can you make? And even if you're thinking that it is good for people, but it does seem to be about power, the whole nanny state, as you call it, with these guidelines and trying to push them in. Okay.
I think
wow.
I think the other problem is that they find the idea of the J curve very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
They think people will find it very difficult to understand. So they think if we tell people that a little bit of alcohol is good for you, then they'll go obviously and think, oh, a whole lot of this is good for you. But you see, if there would be much more nuance than that, we're not stupid. As you said earlier, we know that too much water will kill you. Too much running, exercise will kill you. Too little will kill you. So there are lots of J curves in all of life. Life is full of J curves.
Yeah, life's complex, and that makes it a good thing, not a bad thing. But and then the risk is the public stops listening to guidelines that could be good for them if they made sense. So we stop trusting.
The British guidelines were quite good until recently, until 2016, but they were actually drawn up by a team of civil servants who had in fact done exactly the same thing as I had done, had gone to the British Medical Library, the biggest one in London, and done exactly what I did, looked at all the data. They were surprised at what they found, and they came up with the idea that with recommending 4 units a day for men and half that for women. Now that was about 28 grams of alcohol a day. Now that was a very sensible. They didn't recommend. They said don't go above that.
Right.
But actually that was the optimum dose for maximum health, because I knew people wouldn't listen to it anyway. Otherwise, but it was very, very sensible. And then 4 or 5 years later, the medics came in and halved all that, and then said wine is an old wives' tale, all that kind of stuff. So it's a slippery slope we're going down, and we ought to fight it.
Yes, exactly. It's enough to drive you to drink. But
I want to say to your viewers, you are seeing a very red-faced man in front of you. I'm not red-faced because I'm angry. I'm red-faced because I've just come back from a week in Greece.
You look tanned, not red. You look tanned. You look
red.
You look healthy. You look Mediterranean healthy.
I think over-healthy. I think I've had too much. I've had over on the wrong side of the J curve of sun.
You've stored up some good polyphenols there.
Good vitamin D, yeah.
It's all good.
Don't think I'm some kind of mad old fart,
No, you've done the science, you've done the work. What's next for you, Tony, in terms of, are you going to do another book or something on wine and health or alcohol, or are you moving on to different areas? What's your next project?
I'm never one to sort of let the tide wash around my feet. I think I've done wine and alcohol, but if they keep on going down this route, I'm going to do a really, really big number on them, and I've got a new title for it and so on.
New book, yeah.
But I've got 1 or 2 other things where again the authorities have lied through their teeth.
Yeah.
Lied through their teeth. And
hold them to account.
Before I die, I've got 2 more books to do, and then I shall die a happy man.
That's great. With a perfect heart and everything else, you'll just, when you're 120. As we wrap up our conversation, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to cover? Or are you completely exhausted by this?
You've done very well, haven't we? Anyway. No, thank you so much for inviting me. And as I say, I do hope do apologise to my readers for looking like
Oh, not at all. And on the
lobster.
podcast, they really won't know.
Okay, wind down the gain on the red button.
Yes, we'll put the filter on you. How can people find you online, you and your books, Tony?
I don't have a website. I can't see the point because Mr. Amazon does that for me, as it were.
Yep.
He prints my book. I think Jeff Bezos, what he's done, I don't approve of his politics one bit, but as a man who's allowed me, I tried to get publishers to take my book, my first book. No one was interested. Second book,
Too
even
counterintuitive.
more popular.
Yeah.
No one, exactly, too controversial. So I had to self-publish it. So, and Jeff Bezos doesn't censor self-published books, as far as I can see. I'm really, I am thankful to the man. So, and the fact is, it's very cheap to write a book on his print-on-demand system. There's no upfront capital cost. And so he's done a wonderful job for people like me getting truth out to the public so the public can hear the truth.
Absolutely. And there's more and more self-publishing these days. It's not however we might have been snobby about it in the past.
The vanity publishing.
It's not vanity publishing because, I've published 3 books with Penguin Random House. But, my next one, I am considering going the self-publishing route because there's this is going down another rabbit hole, but there's no more money in publishing. I mean, the advances and everything else, and you do all the work anyway. So I think there are a lot of smart entrepreneurs now publishing their own books. Why not take 90% of the revenue versus 10%? You're going to do the same amount of work anyway. So we can find the very good news about wine and the good news about booze, both of which are on Amazon and perhaps other online retailers, but Amazon's probably the easiest one where we can find your books. Tony, thank you so much. This has been terrific. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I know listeners are going to love this. We covered all a lot of the bases. There's still lots more in your book, I should say. It's definitely don't think you've had enough by just listening to this episode or two here. So do go get the books. But thank you, Tony. I appreciate this.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate you asking me, of course.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.